Before we begin this podcast, it is important to acknowledge the land this piece was created on. I begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which the university stands upon. Though we are spread out across the globe in this seminar, I, as a Jabberong person, invite you to listen and engage with this podcast that deals with themes of colonisation and racism in Australia. We also acknowledge the Menung people of the Nurang Nation, whose ancestors were directly affected by the subject of our research.
Hello everyone, this is Compass Radio Channel. Today we have come to the Arts Building of the University of Melbourne. And now we are going to take you to enjoy the panoramic view of King George Sound. The painting is based on a sketch of Robert Dale made on Caloris Mountain. Due to Dale being an ordnance weaver and draftsman, this sketch shows the skin of this mountain in 1829 accurately. When Dale returned to London in 1833, Dale asked Robert Haville to produce a panorama of the sketches and publish it. This panorama was known as Panoramic View of King George Sound. This panorama includes the nature features of the mountain, such as granite, unique plants, and so on. This image also records the life of the Aboriginal people in 1829, such as fishing, hunting, and talking with white soldiers. In addition, this panorama contains some famous geographical features, including Oyster Bay, Princess Royal Harbour, and so on. Now, let's contact our friends in the Arts Building, like them to give us details about the panorama.
Hi everyone, I'm Yixue. I'm currently in the Art Building at the University of Melbourne, and I'm here with you to look at this painting. There are so many little details in this painting that you need to look closely to notice. When you look at the painting from a distance, the mountains, the bay, the large trees come into view, and you will get an impression that this is a natural world. And as you get closer, you see the fertile land behind the mountains and the human moving around on the top of the mountains. Let's now take a closer look at the painting. First, we move to the left. The tall tropical trees, the low bushes, the granite and the white flowers shows a natural environment suitable for living things. We gradually move to the right. The human moving around on the gradient raised our curiosity as to what they were actually doing. These people are running around without sound. Were they playing or were they catching animals? To their right, 4 people are gathered around a tree. Some are climbing, others are lying on the ground, and 2 others are pointed to the tree, seemingly saying, "This is a beehive, we can get some honey." Moving further to the right is a group of people. There were a dog and some children. We observe that these humans are unclothed, primitive in appearance. At this point, we gradually come to the right half of the picture, and a fascinating sight appears: horse, soldiers. They were well dressed, white-skinned, with their head held high in contrast to the human we saw earlier, and it's easy to see that these white men are talking with these primitive people and shaking hands. And here I think there are those who like me might have some questions. What were they talking about? Why did these white people come here? What was their purpose? Did they really get along so harmoniously? Okay, now we are going to contact our researchers, Jian and Zhino, to help us answer these questions.
Okay, so now we're on to research methods. So we mainly use the painting itself as our primary source of information for this research, extracting simple and more abstract information from the painting. For instance, the indigenous people hunting with spears on their island. But on top of that, we also use the internet, such as Google Scholar and many more, not only for much more detailed information that we might have not gotten from the painting itself, such as other academics' interpretation of the painting that may differ from our ways of viewing the painting, which could expand our knowledge of the painting and environment of the indigenous people and the British soldiers colonizing them. but we also use the internet to either confirm or deny the information that we found from the painting, whether a certain piece of information that we found is true or not. So our group also did a literary analysis that is similar to that of the close reading that we did on the painting for our primary source of information, as mentioned before. We also took an inspiration from one of the Meet the Researchers video, which was about anti-slavery movement, to better understand the surroundings of the colonized indigenous people at the time. So we're moving on to research outcomes.
Hi guys, I'm Zhinle Chen, a researcher about art painting. I studied and researched the panoramic field for a long time. Through this study, I summarized the study techniques. Outcome is that I can learn a lot of history that I did not know before, but also master skills of analyzing paintings, the methods of researching materials, and so on. Through a lot of information on the internet, I find the research outcome is that we know the events depicted in the panoramic field of King George's Son are not true. On the surface, it seems that the Europeans and the indigenous people get along well and they communicate happily and help each other heartily. They try to get close to the indigenous people from the beginning, gain their chance, and realize their vigilance. But in fact, hidden behind this is the colonial occupation plan that capitalism has thought about, made, and arranged for a long time. The white people first scheduled this plan in 18th century. They liked the geography, location, and high-quality nature environment and other significant factors. They came to the island purposefully and then violently Aboriginal people, stole property, and even widely treated Aboriginal people as the biological killers. The Aboriginal people live in Western Australia for at least 47,000 years, and about 6,000 to 10,000 indigenous people live here in the Swan River colony. As a result, from 1850 to 1868, more than 10,000 Europeans came to the Swan River. By 1868, the number of people from Europe had exceeded the number of indigenous people. It shows how fast the white people are occupying this area. The original land vegetation has been destroyed and became the administrative region of the white people. The indigenous people have lost their former homes, and the indigenous population have been significantly reduced, and their cultures have been lost. If they could live in peace at that time, we might not be able to learn more about indigenous languages, habits, and so on.
But how does this connect to the future and the current state of our world, I hear you ask? Well, for that we need to focus on what this research project was inspired by, the New Futures themes. For those unaware, the New Futures themes are a set of areas that encompass how research in the arts and humanities affect our day-to-day lives. The theme most prevalent to our topic today is indigeneity, the experiences and tribulations faced by the traditional owners of the land. From our research and what you've already heard, the scenes and relationships depicted in Robert Dale's painting are inherently false. Dale's work portrays an idealised and almost fantastical version of events where the British soldiers and the Minang people get along like best friends out for a morning stroll. We see British soldiers in their iconic red coats on the far right panels of the panorama, shaking hands with Indigenous people, and even receiving offerings from adults and children as they sit on horseback. Throughout the rest of the panorama, the Minang people are seen playfully climbing dead trees and frolicking through the fields. The background and nature that encompasses the piece is vast and colourful, a bright, lively land of lush pasture as far as the eye can see. At first, this panorama seems happy and gleeful. I mean, who would not want to be a part of such joy and colour in a painting? But the real manipulation here is that this piece is from the coloniser's perspective. It's a rose-tinted lens, a glass-half-full, whimsical take on what was a horrible experience from the Indigenous perspective. Dale's piece is a prime example of the saying, history is written from the winner's perspective, as that is exactly what it is. Robert Dale was a skilled landscape artist, so his artwork has been accepted for years as an accurate and incredibly detailed view of what colonisation of Albany was really like. But consider this for a moment. What if the Minang people had the same resources and opportunity to create similar artwork to Dale's? Would history view it differently? This is where we connect to the theme of indigeneity, because that is the problem, plain and simple. the Indigenous perspective is rarely taken into account when viewing sources such as these. Australian society was built by colonisers, so the foundations of how we look at our history is affected by their views and values. It is true that there are few written records that have survived today from Aboriginal people, but why are we as a society so quick to discount the value of oral tradition? It all comes back to the original intentions of the colonisers way back in the 18th century. At first, Australia was believed to be a terra nullius, uninhabited and fit to house the influx of British prisoners as a result of the Industrial Revolution. The 60,000 years of Aboriginal tradition were discounted as primitive and inconsequential. Over the past 300 years, there have been continued attempts to erase Aboriginal culture through government policies such as the White Australia policy or the events of the Stolen Generation. Indigeneity has always been in danger, as our societal view of Australia is based on appeasing the British or colonists in general. Historian Gender Gooding wrote in the journal article The Politics of a Panorama, Robert Dale and King George's Sound, that the panorama acted almost as a tourist pamphlet, depicting two cultures in harmony with each other and their environment, as to convince British emigrants to move across the globe as the country grew in the mid-1800s. The theme of indigeneity encompasses the whole lived experiences of Indigenous groups, and Dale's panorama fails to recognise the Menung people as a group worth the time of day to have their own perspective. There is hope, however, as ideologies such as post-colonialism seek to deconstruct the colonist sources and instead reinstate the voice of Aboriginal people. This new era of research contains another one of the New Futures themes, the real-world impact, where we as researchers and academics can begin to undo the years of pain caused by colonialism and bring the history of Aboriginal Australians to light. Our podcast today has given you an insight into the research that was conducted into the authenticity of Robert Dale's narrative in the panoramic view of King George's Sound. As a group, we found that Dale's portrayal of British and Aboriginal relations was indeed false, and that the reality was a violent and dark display of colonisation against the Menung people. We thank you for taking the time to listen today and wish you well.